So parents can be proactive in initiating that if the student is struggling. So I always say it's better to start when there's the first sign rather than wait for things to get really bad.
Thank you for joining us today on the Family Care Learning Podcast. My name is Shelley Yutsky, and I'm the Foster Care Program Manager here at Christian Family Care. And today we will be talking about the importance of getting educational services for foster care children. We have the privilege of having Jenny Mullins here with us, and she's one of the founders of Advocacy 319.
Yep,
there we go. I got it.
Yep.
Jenny, before you start talking about Advocacy 319, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. My name is Jenny, and I was a teacher for about 10 years and then had a daughter who we found out has autism. So I stayed home with her and just kind of advocated for what she needed in school. That led to kind of a career in special education advocacy, which long and short of it is I started a nonprofit to support the needs of children in foster care.
Okay, so you can go ahead and tell us a little bit about Advocacy 319, and I'm interested in the 319. I have an inkling I know what that is, but go ahead and share that with us.
Yeah, so our name comes from Proverbs 31:9, and that says, stand up, speak rightly, defend the rights of the poor and vulnerable. So that kind of captures our mission and what we want to do. And so our organization provides educational support for students in foster care or impacted by foster care. So we provide one-on-one, we have a team of volunteer advocates that are matched with families as they have students struggling in school, and they help them navigate the kind of complicated special education process because it's a lot of jargon and acronyms and words. And so we have volunteers that walk with them through that process, and then we provide training for foster care support groups on educational supports, as well as training for schools and understanding how trauma affects learning.
Okay. I did see that trauma teaching and training for basically the teachers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how did that get started? I mean, because we know our kids will come into care and they've had all this trauma, and now we put them in school. I mean,
right.
And
wish them luck.
Yeah, exactly. So tell us how that training kind of helps alleviate some of that for those teachers too, because they don't have that resource.
Right. Yeah. Actually, in Arizona, there's a huge movement of trauma-informed education, which we're excited about. But a lot of schools really struggle to understand the trauma piece and how that affects students educationally. I shared in the presentation that there was a Stanford study that found that students who have experienced trauma are 32 times more likely to have learning or behavioral challenges. So we know that it's directly tied. So our training that we do for teachers and school staff is really kind of giving them a high-level view of trauma and how that impacts students, and then really practical tips on how to implement things like sensory breaks and calming techniques that help all students, but especially our trauma kiddos. And a lot of that has come from our own experience. We have a volunteer team, mostly of educators or foster parents, and then my own experience in the classroom. And so that's been really well received from schools because I think they're struggling and knowing how to meet those needs.
Right. And then you add COVID, a pandemic with that. And so now you're trying to do it virtually and having kids sit and all of those other things. So it's great that you guys are a resource for those teachers to be able to kind of go that way.
Yeah.
From the foster parent standpoint, we have a child and we take them to school, and a lot of times we don't know where they are. They may say their age and we put them in that grade, but what happens when you realize this isn't working, we have to figure something else out? What would you say to that foster family at that point? Yeah,
unfortunately in special education there's a lot of jargon. And so one of the key magic words that we were just talking about previously in the training is to request a comprehensive psychoeducational evaluation. So that's not just looking at academics, but looking at all areas of education. So that might be, do they struggle with do they have sensory processing difficulties? Do they struggle with making friends or taking turns? So that evaluation is kind of the first step, and that's something that foster parents can advocate and ask for.
Okay, so how do they ask for that?
Yes. So the first thing is always ask for it in writing. And if you go to our website, advocacy319.org, we have a template that families can use to request that evaluation. If they get stuck or if they hit barriers, they can always reach out to us. On our website, there's a referral form and just a short intake form, and we can kind of help them navigate that. But the first step is just putting that request in writing.
Okay. Once that request is in writing, then how long does the school have to actually perform that screening? Test.
So there's a lot of timelines. So the school has to meet with the family within 15 days.
Okay.
And from that meeting, they decide what they want to evaluate. From the date that they get that signature permission to evaluate, they have 60 days to complete the evaluation and discuss the results.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot where we don't know, like, how much does a foster parent have as far as the power to be able to request those things?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we're saying, well, we want DCS to do it, or we need to have the birth family's permission to do it, things along that line. Is that the case, or is it?
It's very complicated. So DCS, the first kind of misnomer is that DCS has any involvement in that process, and actually they don't. They have no legal authority in that regard. If bio parents' rights have not been severed, the birth parent is actually the one that signs the consent for the evaluation. The foster parent can definitely ask for that evaluation, get the school to meet together, but in order for them to proceed, they need the birth parent's signature. If rights have been severed, unfortunately, the foster parent still can't sign consent. The Department of Ed has to assign a surrogate parent to sign that consent, which is very complicated, and most districts even don't know that that's supposed to be the case. So please reach out to us if you need help.
That sounds like one of those, like, well, I think I need to reach out to Jenny now.
Yes. So if you get to that point and you're not sure who can sign, just reach out to us. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, because it is like navigating almost like the judicial system for dependencies and all that kind of stuff. There's just all of these hoops that have to apparently
and
go
timelines
through,
and
and things along that line.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of times when we have kids, going back to that trauma, is we have kids that will have behaviors at school. And so you don't know whether it's because of the behaviors they're not learning.
Right.
Or is it because they're not learning and that's why they have the behaviors and all of those types of things. Is there, with this screening that you were talking about, is that kind of the areas that they're looking at to try to figure out, like, what is it that we need to address, whether it's the trauma and that's why the behaviors, or it's the education piece, and we have to, they go hand in hand.
Right,
but
they do, yeah. And I would say most of the referrals we get are for behavior. It's not really academic reasons. And so behavior is a component that the school team can evaluate to see why are those behaviors occurring. Is it because they're dysregulated, or is it because they might be hungry and so they're hoarding food, or different things that maybe present. But like you said, they're linked. They go together. And so requesting that evaluation, a piece of that could be to look at the behaviors. Yeah.
So, there's so many variables.
I know.
Because we have some children that definitely have some cognitive delays, and that may be due to substance exposure, some type of abuse or neglect that they had, things along that line. So when this screening happens and they end up finding out, like, yes, there's some special services that we need to have in place and those type of things, is that at that point, because now the foster parent has asked for that and, to be happening, we've had the sign off and everything. Now, is it more of an IEP that gets put in place at that time?
Yeah.
And then can you kind of explain those
two
different, I know there's two different things going on there at 503.
A lot of times parents will ask the school, I'd like my child to have an IEP, but in order to get that, the school has to evaluate first and see if they're eligible for special education. So there's 13 categories a student can qualify under. So they have to qualify under one, and then from there they have 30 days to write an IEP. And the IEP is based completely on the needs of this child. So not necessarily even what qualified them, but it could be any area that they're struggling in school. An IEP is for specially designed instruction. So students, let's say they have dyslexia and they struggle to read, they need a specially designed instruction for students with dyslexia versus just the regular reading curriculum. There is something that you mentioned, the 504 plan, and that would be more just accommodations. So maybe a student just needs a movement break, or they need some kids need a wiggle seat. Yeah. Or they need to be able to stand in the back of the classroom. Those are all modifications or accommodations. And so that is part of a 504 plan.
So like that would include if things are getting too loud.
Right.
Or taking, like you said, those little breaks, or not having a certain boundary around them, so that they feel comfortable and safe and secure to be able to sit and learn.
Right.
So cool.
Yeah.
Great. Is there anything else? I know people can visit their website.
Yeah.
Your website, and kind of look over the educational pieces in that. But is there anything specifically that we didn't kind of like cover with some of the services that you provide? Yeah.
So I think one thing for families to know is whenever they feel like there's a problem, that's when they should initiate with a school. Sometimes schools will say, well, we need to kind of wait 45 days or do this 45-day screener. And that is true on the school's end, that they do a screening every 45 days, but they don't need to wait for that. So parents can be proactive in initiating that if the student is struggling. So I would say it's better to start when there's the first sign rather than wait for things to get really bad and then start the process, because it is a complicated process. It takes 60 days for the evaluation and then another 30 days for an IEP. So that's 3 months. That's a whole quarter. So to not wait. If you have concerns, reach out to the school psychologist and the school principal and ask for that meeting to talk about your concerns.
So it really sounds like you're saying, you need to start it because you already have these other time frames that are going to hit.
Right.
So you're better off just knowing. Do you feel that maybe there's some pushback from some schools that, like, well, we're going to wait because we can do this or whatever, but it's just at that point, as a parent, you need to be more upfront and say, no, we really need to do this now.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of schools will take a wait and see approach. And that's a lot of what I hear when I talk to families, is the school's told them, well, let's just wait and see. And while that might be appropriate sometimes, for our kids, if they don't have time to wait and see, we need to get them support as soon as possible. Like yesterday, usually in most cases. Another barrier that I hear is schools will say, well, we have our tiered intervention. We have our reading intervention program or our math intervention program. So we're going to do these interventions and see if they work first before we evaluate. And actually the Department of Ed has made it clear that can't be used as a reason to delay or deny an evaluation. So if you hear that, while that's great that they want to do some interventions, that doesn't mean that the school shouldn't evaluate to see if there's more underlying things going on. So those are some of the pushback that we hear from schools is, let's wait and see, or let's try these interventions first, and then we'll talk about evaluating. Or another kind of barrier we see is students moving around from school to school. And so by the time they get stable in one place, they've missed lots of opportunity. So I was
going to say placement in a home may not be, when you're talking about that much time, 3 months or whatever, if you're wait, and then now, they may already be gone, which kind of leads to the next question. Once a plan has been put in place for that child basically takes that no matter where they go. So that's the other benefit of like, don't wait as a foster parent, don't wait, like get it going, because once they leave, whether it's reunification or finding permanency anywhere else, if they're not in the same school, that goes with them.
Right. Yeah. By law, that follows the child wherever they go, like you said. And so that it's a legal document that gives a lot of maybe they have a great teacher that's doing a lot of great strategies. We want all of that included so that whoever is the next teacher gets that information. What we're hearing too is a lot of foster families don't even know if a child has an IEP because that information is not provided by DCS. So every district has a district liaison that can pull those records. So if you are not sure, or maybe your child said, oh, I had an IEP, but you have never seen it. If you reach out to your school district's liaison, they can pull that information.
Can you tell us, is there any cost involved in using your services at Advocacy 319?
Yeah, that's actually partly why I started a nonprofit, is I wanted this to be accessible for foster families, so we don't charge for any of our services. All of our funding comes from private foundation grants or tax credit donations. So, no charge. So just reach out to us.
All right. You want to share your website and any phone number to get a hold of you?
Yeah. So our website is www.advocacy 31NINE, just to make it complicated, .org, advocacy319.org. And on there, there's several different boxes. If you click on the box for services, there's an intake form. And if you fill that out, we'll get an advocate in touch with you if you need support. There's also another box if you want a training, if you want to request a training, if you're in a foster care support group, if you want one of us to come and talk to your group, we're happy to do that too. Yeah.
Very good. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, Jenny, and sharing all of those ins and outs and the timeframes and all of that does get complicated, but I'm glad that we have agencies, that you've created and be able to have that as a resource for a lot of our families and specifically to help our children that find themselves in the system and having had that trauma and all of those things, and to be able to have school be that safe and secure place for them is just really so important. So I just thank you for your time with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.